everyone. So glad you're back with us in this great webinar series that we've begun. The forums are great bringing people together, and this is our newest way to do so. So super excited about Trellis Energy joining us and sharing some information for us. Real quickly, wanted to send a reminder out to everyone about our San Antonio forum in November. So be on the lookout for information in regards to joining us virtually as well as in person. So super exciting news in relationship to upcoming discussion there. But now I'm super excited to hear from Douglas Allen and hearing what he has to say in regard to future-proof your business. And we all need to do that for success. So I'm seriously looking forward to hearing from him. So I'll turn it over to Connie to introduce Douglas.
Thank you, Christy. I appreciate that. Happy to have everyone with us today. We're going to give you an opportunity to talk with you about future-proofing your business. This is a 30-year energy expert. He started his career actually scheduling on a natural gas pipeline. Throughout his iterations through his career, he has worked with regulated, non-regulated assets. So having that hands-on experience to the logistics that the schedulers and individuals face and the critical importance of compliancy, having that hands-on experience has really helped him move into more of a consultative role throughout his career. He spent many years as a creator and a consultant on software, owning his own business and also working with some of the larger players in this market. So we're really excited to have him here at Trellis. He's been here about 3 years, started out as the Vice President of Services, moved over into sales about 1.5 years ago. So having that hands-on knowledge to services and support, understanding the industry, it really creates a real blend of really intellect offerings that Douglas can bring to any situation. So with that, we're going to let Douglas give us some hints on how to future-proof our business. Thanks again.
Thank you, Connie. Bear with me as I get set up here and get my slides ready. All right. So as Connie said, we're here to talk about future-proofing your business, especially in these times of uncertainty. So if you were to ask me in late 2019, and I had a crystal ball, would I have said that, most of the workforce would be working from home in the middle of 2020, that, we'd all be, dealing with, our kids not going to school, et cetera, or that social distancing would become a good word instead of a bad word? Those are things I don't think any of us would have predicted here. But had we known from a business perspective what we were going to be facing, then we could have done things to be prepared and to future-proof ourselves from these things. But ideally, had we known this, we would have rolled out video and collaboration tools for remote work. I think we all understand how important those have become. We would have established a clear work-from-home policy. Here at Trellis, we didn't really even have that when we started, and I don't know about everyone else, but I think a lot of companies did not have much of a policy, and now all of a sudden, overnight, we've just had to create one. So these are very rapid and really just unprecedented levels of change that we're all adapting to. Certainly, we would have moved away from client-server applications where at all possible so that we could handle some of this remote work. We would have removed or reduced the amount of dependency we had on things like VPNs that require you to put in multiple logins or slow down your systems if you're connecting to an old one. I think we can all kind of empathize with that day to day as we have to log in multiple times and it's slower, et cetera. Ideally, we wouldn't have logged into so many systems. So having the ability to, really just get into the one application you need and not try and log into 3 or 4, et cetera. So for us, it's, even logging in to do a timesheet, one more extra time you have to type in your password. It would have also been better had we consolidated down, like I said, reduce the number of applications to make sure that we could see our business clearly. And then lastly, and most importantly, a lot of us still had desktops and everything at the office. So not having to take all that home or recreate your basically your office environment at home. We would have had lightweight software and equipment to make it that much easier for us to access all the information that we needed. But again, that would have taken a really accurate crystal ball. So a couple of things that came out of all of this that I thought was very interesting, and these statistics are, I'm sure, already out of date, but look at the kinds of just incredible change that we went through. So Microsoft Teams is a good example of this, which is, 70% increase, 75 million users. Look at Zoom, from 10 to 200 million users. It just gives you the idea of the monumental amount of change that we all just went through. Another good set of data points is that, they were looking at and saying in 2021 that 25 to 30% of us would already be working remotely. And I think that's an important point. These are things that we knew we were migrating to over time, and we were all taking our own pacing at it, but it's always easy to just kind of, let those things evolve. And here, this accelerated. This is what I call an acceleration event. And so, to say that 25 to 30% of the people would be working from home, I think is a clear understatement. I suspect in 2021, that number is going to still be in the 50 to 75%. So again, it just speaks to how much and how quickly we did things. And then, of course, universally, overnight, we created that work from home policy, which we're all still kind of working through. And then this next one's just a little bit more for fun. I think we've all experienced this challenge as we're having meetings with all of the different things going on. So, it's one of those things that I look at is every time we have meetings, I try and really take a positive attitude around it as things get disruptive or, somebody can't connect. So I think we've all experienced that. So especially with the kids. So let's talk about this a little bit to give you an idea and really bring this home. I referenced kids a few moments ago, but the key here is that it's an unprecedented level of change that we've gone through. And I really take education as a good example of this. Almost universal school closures overnight. They had to make a call and they did it very quickly. The classes are now provided remotely. Most of the children, just like we are in business, are working, distance learning. They had challenges getting equipment to the students. The websites couldn't handle the load of people coming in and trying to get information or log into their classes or get homework, let alone the administration of grades and, attendance and all of those things. And what it really tells you is that education is a good example for us to understand that it has fundamentally been changed and, to use a term, disrupted. And I'm not sure that education, as we've understood it to date, will ever return to the way it is. And quite honestly, we're no different. The energy industry itself has had to react as much as education has. We've been disrupted from the perspective of things that we used to do in the office, we aren't anymore. And everything from, how you're getting supply to how you're transporting across the grid, managing, that supply into, city gates or, to various points on your system, all the way down to how consumers are reacting and the different loads. Everything is different for the energy industry. We're no different. It really is the same in lots of ways. So in this new norm that we have, you have to ask yourself, just like your children are, how do I do my day-to-day activities? How do I get access to everything? How do I make sure I'm accomplishing my job on a day-to-day basis? How are you going to collaborate on creating solutions to your issues? Previously we could all just get together in the war room. We could sit down, we could whiteboard. So in the new norm, how are we going to tackle these things? How are you going to, obtain your supply and maintain reliability on your systems? For that matter, how do you balance your gas systems when everybody who's supposed to be doing this is now in a different place, using tools that they're not familiar with, et cetera? So at the end of it, you really still have to get your invoices out the door every month. And we know this. So these are all things you need to be asking yourself, how are we going to do them in this new norm? Meet the compliance needs, the regulatory reporting deadlines. I'm sure lots of you have been asking yourself, how are we going to do this? And it's still evolving. Some of these things haven't even occurred yet. For instance, some of the regulatory deadlines are quarterly or yearly, and you've got to pull a lot of information together from a disparate number of systems to try and make those happen. The other challenge you'll run across is, tools that you had in your office and everything else, being remote, how do you do that? How do you, check your positions on other pipelines? How do you manage the risk of having commodity? The commodity risk is something that you have to look at, and that means having good access to data and to systems to manage this. So as we were thinking about these things, and part of what we were doing to put all of this together to share with folks is, some of the things that just really no longer made sense in the new norm. Printing reports. That seems pretty simple, but I had a really old printer at home, and so now I've just kind of had to make do with not printing anything. So, and I'm not sure that it makes sense going forward. With all the tools that we should have and be able to do going forward, and looking at how we adjust to this change doesn't make sense anymore. Spreadsheets. How are we supposed to collaborate and do those? Those are really made for individuals. It's really hard to get to shared drives. How do you multitask and collaborate with a set of spreadsheets? It just doesn't make sense. Client server applications, all of the additional connections you need to do, your data moving back and forth in large bulk amounts, again, just doesn't make sense in the situation we are today. For instance, using different applications across, if you're in an LDC and you've got a different application depending on which state you're working in or which system, whether it's a cost of gas or what have you, your forecasting being different than where you're handling your supply, where you're ultimately, having your consumers interact to get data. All of those across multiple systems. Earlier I kind of mentioned having to log into each and every one of those and find a way to get connectivity, if you even could in this new norm. These are things that just don't make sense anymore. And then, of course, if you've got a single install, whether it's on your desktop or if it's in a server room back at the office, et cetera, those are subject to failure. You don't want to be in a single location with a single point of failure. So in the new norm, these just aren't adding up anymore. So that brings us to the point of saying, from a digital transformation perspective, what makes sense now? So in these new times with the remote capabilities that we have, here's what makes sense to us. It's having a web-based application. It's being able to access that just through a URL without all the extra heavyweight items that you need. It's having a single platform so that you can look at all of your different data together through one login and one uniform kind of view of the world. So you get rid of those extra systems and you'll just be able to get rid of the complexity of whether they had to be integrated or interfaced or what have you from that perspective. So the single platform makes a lot of sense in the new norm so that you just log in and get to the things that you need to do in your business and your day-to-day activities. Another aspect of that, where we're going, is this single platform approach to ensure that your data is being captured consistently so that you can utilize it. Again, it's just making the complexity go down. Having something that's in a sustainable architecture with strong cybersecurity. Everybody hears about these things. We've seen things in the past with, even other providers to the type of software that we do have had challenges with cybersecurity and been impacted by that. And that's never good for anybody, not for our industry, not for the people who were impacted, nor for the companies that are trying to make sure it doesn't happen. And then lastly, I think it's important to have a company that's a good, solid company with a good customer focus, whether it's you towards your customers or whoever you're working with for your systems, to have a strong focus on you and your business. Okay, so where do we see these things going? So at this point, we've seen the things that don't work so well for the new norm and the things that you need to do to position yourself to future-proof your business. And now the question becomes, what's next? Where is the business headed at this point from the perspective of saying, what do I need to be prepared for? Douglas, why am I doing these things that make sense? In fact, let me back up one slide and speak to that for a second. So from that perspective, these are the things that you need to do to be prepared to future-proof your business. If you've done these things, consolidate down your system so that it reduces your maintenance and cost of overhead, to, have a good sustainable architecture that will last for years, to get into the cloud and make sure that you have redundancy and reliability. These are the things that you need to do to future-proof your business and to really be prepared for the next set of change. Because much like we saw today, where we were already moving to things like, okay, we know we need to move to the cloud, we know we need to do these things, but it was more of an evolution. And then we had an acceleration event. And that's forced us to move to these things overnight. And that's why these things make sense now. Conversely, as we move forward in time, these are where things are headed. And so to really be prepared for that next event that's going to drive and accelerate these things, you need to have prepared yourself today. So here's kind of where we see things going. More and more, we're going to see self-service data. And really what that means is data for you to get access to, where you don't have to go through an IT organization for special reports, et cetera. You can allow your customers to come in and see the same data that you're seeing, where it makes sense, obviously, and to pull that data themselves instead of having to call you or ask you for it. If you're in spreadsheets, or we still have a lot of people that are on mainframe systems, those are items where the customers can't be self-reliant. You need to move and be prepared that they can start to do that. Most of these things are about driving efficiency. And that's really where we're headed to next, is we've gotten to the cloud, we've gotten the sustainability, now we need to work on efficiency. Sorry, Connie was just flagging me that I had a question that probably makes sense for me to answer now rather than at the end. So again, let me back up to this slide. So one of the folks on the conference asked, why is it important to have consistent data across business lines? The real reason kind of bears onto the next slide as well, and I'll switch back to it in just a second. But the ability to look across your business lines. And one of the things that we're finding here at Trellis is that the systems that we're providing to the energy industry really represent enterprise resource planning, ERP. Okay, it's the same complexity as all the other types of resource planning that you need to do. It's complicated. There's a lot of business rules depending on your suppliers. So really, this type of software is what we're starting to call energy enterprise resource planning. But what it does is allow you to capture that whole value chain in a single system. And you ask yourself, well, why is that important? Because the more you try and leverage your data and look at it between supply to consumption to all of the transportation in the middle of that, having it in a consistent form and allowing and having the ability to tie those things together in a logical manner. Right now, and let me switch to my next slide to speak to this a little bit. You'll look down here at the third bullet, and it's data analytics and predictive actionable intelligence. So that's where a lot of these things are heading to, is taking all this data that we collect, whether it's from SCADA systems, whether it's the final measurement, the information that's coming from consumption versus forecast versus weather, where the constraints are on the grid. All of this data is out there, and there's a lot of data science going on right now to try and say, okay, we should be able to leverage all this. We can store it all, we can look at it. But you know what the challenge is? They can't tie it together, because a location over here is not called the same thing as a location over there. When you take measurement, those are devices and meters and cross-reference IDs. So having it all consolidated into a single system across your multiple business lines is going to give you access to your data. It's the precursor to what's coming down the line in data analytics. And ultimately, it's going to be the thing that allows you to tie and say, when I've got more demand over here, it leads to these events that you can now predict and say, okay, we know when the load on this part of our system is X. Traditionally, that means on one of our upstream pipelines, they'll also typically see a constraint. So these are the predictive things. And now you can say, wow, if that's the case, I really should be purchasing over here and moving through an alternate, all because you knew you ended up with additional demand in this location. So those items that you can now tie together that have a relationship, having it in a single system allows you to tie it together using the same framework and the same vocabulary. That's why that's important. So it's a great question, and that's why I took a moment to go ahead and back up and answer that. So from the perspective of saying you've got the data analytics, but we're also going to have what they call, the automation. And again, most of these things speak to driving efficiency out of what we already do and allowing us to focus more on this predictive, actionable intelligence. So the automation for mundane tasks that's what they call robotic process automation, or RPAs. So when you see that out there, when you see RPA, it's nothing fancy. It just means something that goes out there and does the task over and over again. So we'll start to remove those really mundane, repetitive tasks and free you up to focus on some of these additional kind of higher value type things that having the data together will allow you to do. I'm sure everybody's heard about blockchain. This is stuff that's being looked at not only at NASB, but at different banking organizations, et cetera. So blockchain is just nothing more than what they call a ledger system, just like we do in our general ledger systems. It's just that it's remote and it allows you to track all the transactions. There's a world where potentially instead of sending out invoices, all that information is available real time. And so you wouldn't have to send out invoices if blockchain comes to fruition in the way we think it might. So there's a number of those types of items. Again, efficiency. Instead of having to push the data out, we've made it self-service to your consumers and your clients. Artificial intelligence. These are things where it's going to take even some of this stuff that's a little more fuzzy and make it even more available to us. Again, these are trends that are coming up. I don't know that anybody has the real answers, but if you aren't prepared by being in the cloud, having a single system, being able to rationalize your data across multiple business lines, then you're not going to be ready for these things. And this is the next big change. And we could be seeing an acceleration event that comes up. So that's where we would, suggest, and part of the reason we decided to have this webinar was to kind of, help you understand what might be coming down the road and what you can do to future-proof your business for it. So that really leads us to a little bit of the stock market, relationship. So I know it's hard to invest in these times. When the market's down, it's the hardest time to go put more money in it. So everybody in 2020 has seen that trend with budgets being reduced, et cetera. But for 2021 and really even late 2020, this is important that you start this, transformation, this digitalization to where you want to be. So it's always the best time to start as in the past, but today is the next best option. All right, so Trellis. At Trellis, we've been focusing on digital transformation since the beginning. That's one of the key precepts of everything that we've been doing over the last 10 years with our software. So, as you're evaluating software for these types of things to modernize and do that digital transformation we've been talking about throughout the webinar, keep those things in mind. Refer back to the slides and say, okay, these are the things that make sense now as you're doing those things. So, again, Trellis has been at this a long time. We recognize that everybody has options. You can continue to work with your existing systems, et cetera. But, again, us or something else, just keep these precepts in mind. Okay, so let's do a little bit of question and answer. There's a couple of more that have come in, so hopefully I can get to all of them, but I think I'm seeing here on my other monitor that there's probably more than I can get to. So one of the first ones that came through was, okay, so you talk about, this digital transformation, Douglas. How long is that going to take? Apparently the person submitting this, they work on spreadsheets today. So it sounds like, in that circumstance, you don't have an old legacy system, et cetera. So how long will something like this take? I would say it's really dependent. It's dependent on the size and complexity of your business. It is based on, how much your culture is ready to accept all of these things. So I would say if you're on spreadsheet and you have a fairly straightforward, business line, then it could be as little as 30 to 60 days to move and do a lot of these things if you're just coming off spreadsheets. It could be much longer if you have, a legacy system. For instance, one of our clients that we worked with recently in the Northeast, they had 5 or 6 different old systems that had been built in-house, and it was a pretty monumental effort. They were interfacing all of those together, so we had to examine all those with them and find out what made sense and do all of that. That was much more protracted. That was measured in probably 14 to 18 month kind of time frame. So as much as I don't like to do it, the real answer is it depends. And the best way to find that out is to work with someone like Trellis or with Trellis yourself, and we can help you do an assessment and look at what those look like from a time frame perspective and what the real complexity will be. So that's a normal part of it. It's a discovery phase almost, what we call think phase. So, and then right on the heels of that becomes the next question, which is how much will this cost? That one I can't hazard an answer to. Again, on the smaller end, it can be very reasonable. On the larger end, it can be very reasonable for those large businesses. But that one really does fall into the, it depends category. We can give you, generally a pretty good look at it after a short conversation. So you should be able to get some of that info. And in fact, here in just a minute, I'll speak to that again. So we have another question. Sorry, give me a second to read it for just a second so I understand it. Okay, so we've talked about the cloud a little bit. And so the question came back is, what cloud environments does your platform run on? And I can't speak to anybody else, but from a Trellis perspective, we're an Oracle partner. So we work with Oracle for most of our stuff. So we actually, when we're doing our private or public SaaS offerings, we work with Oracle. However, we also recognize that everybody should and does need flexibility. So, we're able to provide that, whether it's in Microsoft Azure or AWS or Google, et cetera. So we're somewhat agnostic to that. So from our perspective, we have some flexibility and can run on most of the cloud environments. And again, the reason you want to be in the cloud is for that, access anytime, anywhere, web-based application. That's great, but you also have to have the infrastructure to make sure that if there's a regional event, that you've got a second data center you're going to, just to make sure your system is up and running all the time. How am I doing on time, guys? Good? Okay, I think I've got a few more minutes here, so let me try and catch 1 or 2 more of these questions, and then what we'll do is follow up on any of the questions that I wasn't able to get to, and I know there's probably already a couple of those, I can see them. But what we'll do is follow up either directly with you via email or maybe a phone call. So really appreciate everybody's activity and sending these in. It'd be kind of tough if I was just talking to myself, right? So it goes back to this person was a scheduler apparently who put this one in. It says, okay, you said anytime, anywhere, but can I run it from my phone? Well, the answer is yes. So having been a scheduler, I think Connie mentioned that before, when I was doing it, we didn't have access to all of these different things. So the technology now with most of these systems and with Trellis, you're just accessing a URL on the web and that's it. And then at that point, our application would scale and work on your mobile phone. Ideally better on a tablet so you don't have to pinch and grow so much. But yeah, so when you're catching that, ID3 call and it's late in the evening and you're trying to go to dinner with your family or out or what have you, you can quickly access the system and it's all in the cloud on the web and you can get your confirmations or put in your nom changes or deal with a cut that came in. So yes, you should be able to run it on your phone. Again, a little bit easier on a tablet. Okay, probably this is the last one I'll be able to handle here. So another good one. So how do you see a project happening with this social distancing and no travel? Actually, in my mind, as a consultant who did services work and traveled a bunch, I kind of see it as a good thing. Well, less travel is better. But let me speak a little bit more broadly to that, which is, if in this situation, you're right. This is again where these people signing up on Microsoft Teams and Zoom, we've all had to learn how to make those things work for us. And I really don't see projects being much different than that. I see the fact that we'll have to do more things where there's collaborative whiteboard sessions via these kinds of tools. We'll have to use the video capabilities. et cetera. And we'll kind of have to work our way through some of that. So on the plus side, one of the larger expenses that you can sometimes encounter on these projects is travel. So we'll be knocking out costs really from a lot of these, implementations and projects, just because we won't have that same amount of overhead for travel. People won't be as tired from going through it. So in some ways, I see it as a very positive thing. But much like we've talked about, the ability to have that collaboration and good communication remotely, that'll be a challenge I think we all have to overcome. So I think there's always, with these types of things, pluses and minuses. So this is kind of, where I'll go ahead and start to wrap up. Again, future-proofing your business is about being prepared and moving forward with the technology that you're using today to be well-positioned for those things coming up. So I'll put this up here at the last. This is for both Connie and I, our contact information. I know as we're coming into the latter part of the year in late Q3 and Q4, people are looking at their budgetary cycles, et cetera. And I'll go back to how much does this cost question. And, I can't answer that without having a little bit more details. But if you did need something like that, feel free to reach out to us. We've done that for clients in the past, and we're always happy to kind of help, no obligation, just something to kind of help you out there to say about what would this ballpark, what could you budget for, et cetera. Because again, the key to future-proofing your business is moving to those things earlier rather than later and embracing this digital transformation. So, on behalf of myself and Connie and everybody here at Trellis, I really want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to have gone through and listened to some of the thoughts that we have on what's coming forward. Thank you, Christy, and we really appreciate the partnership that you've provided. So with that, I'll go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you very much for attending.